Yep. There's no room. No room.
Good morning. Hello. Let's give everyone a second to get to your seat and we'll get the morning rolling. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the Atlantic Canada e-commerce workshop. My name is Todd Coombs. I'm the Director of Regional Business Development at Nova Scotia Business Inc. Before I get into the agenda today, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that we're in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'd also like to welcome everyone on the live stream here, the camera in front of us. There's many people taking part in this across Atlantic Canada this morning, so that's great to have you all, so welcome. Today's workshop would not have been possible with many partners, and I'm going to go through the list. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Alibaba, Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, Business Development Bank of Canada, Canada-China Business Council, Export Development Canada, Global Affairs Canada, the Atlantic Region Greater China Division in Shanghai, Innovation PEI, Lulozhou Inc., Newfoundland and Labrador Department of Tourism, Culture, Industry and Innovation, web presence in China, and of course all my colleagues at Nova Scotia Business Inc. That's a long list. I was going through it a lot, and I was like, there's no way I'm memorizing all those, and I'm so used to saying the acronyms. I wish I could have skipped to those. If you have any questions, please see us at the registration desk. There's a couple people out there to help you if you need. Something got skipped. So we have a full agenda today. We're going to start off with 5 presentations, followed by our one-on-one meetings. The 5 presenters are going to go through their expertise on this topic. It's a very interesting topic. Being a director of regional business development is something that we see a lot in the region. People wondering, how do I do this? How do I get a web presence and be successful at that? So it'll be very interesting to hear our presenters today. We're going to have a short break around 11 o'clock for a nutrition break, and then around 1 o'clock, 1:15 or so, we're going to have our buffet lunch. After the networking lunch, in this room here, we're going to be holding the one-on-one meetings, and you should have got if you signed up for one-on-one meetings with some of the partners, you should have been got a scheduled email with your time, and you can just find on the tables there will be signs, and you can find the partner that you're supposed to meet with at that particular time. The short, easy stuff, the housekeeping stuff. Wi-Fi is on your table. I see little cards there with an access code, so if you need that, you can find that. Also, the bathrooms are just down off the right and over to your, across from the spa right outside. So with that, I think it's enough of the easy stuff. We're going to get into the presentations, and I'd like to share the stage. To help me welcome all you here today, I'm pleased to invite Nova Scotia Business Inc.'s President and CEO, Laurel Broden, my boss. Over the last 4 years, Laurel has led our organization through transformations that have contributed to our team's ability to grow the numbers of new exporters and export sales across Nova Scotia. Leading our team, Laurel has also been instrumental in helping build international networks in key markets including the United States, Europe, and Asia. She has seen firsthand the power of growing networks in these key markets and continues to work on strengthening relationships for the betterment of her businesses here at home. Please join me in welcoming Laurel.
Thank you, Todd. Good morning, everyone. Hello, bonjour. I'm very privileged to work with Todd and the rest of our Nova Scotia Business Inc. team in our effort to grow exports and investments for the province and people of Nova Scotia. Although I may be here representing Nova Scotia Business Inc., I am pleased to welcome you on behalf of all 4 Atlantic provinces. Je suis heureux de vous accueillir au nom des 4 provinces de l'Atlantique. Nova Scotia Business Inc. is proud to be a partner in economic development for the Atlantic region. We are all partners with shared goals, aligned and collaborating with the federal government through the Atlantic Trade Investment and Growth Strategy, or what we call ATIGS. ATIGS is a homegrown, historic, and groundbreaking initiative and an excellent example of how federal and provincial partners are collaborating for the good of Atlantic Canada, our businesses, our communities, and our people. The Government of Canada and Atlantic provincial government partners have committed to working hand in hand to create jobs and strengthen the economy by increasing the number of exporters, the value of export sales, diversifying markets, and boosting foreign investment in the region. We want to encourage a culture of exporting in all communities by making sure that the opportunity is available to businesses are made available and accessible. Small and medium-sized businesses are essential to our economy, and we want to see them thrive. This is why we are pleased to host workshops like the one today to educate businesses across the region in opportunities to expand their reach and increase sales. As a small region, we know that great economic opportunities exist outside our borders, both near and far, close to home, and on the other side of the globe. We are an economy that must broaden our horizons, and we must think big from the start. We want as many creative ways to help our retailers diversify markets and grow their exporters. E-commerce and digital platforms are just one more way that companies that do business from Atlantic Canada can reach global markets. Today's business reality is that businesses of all sizes can do business from anywhere to anywhere. And we know that consumers in China want to purchase the high quality and prestigious products that our region has on offer. China continues to be our second largest trading partner, and this relationship remains a priority for Canada and for our region. La Chine continue d'être notre deuxième partenaire commercial en importance, et cette relation demeure une priorité pour le Canada et pour notre région. Here in Nova Scotia, we exported approximately $795 million of exports to China in 2018. But we know there is appetite for more. As China's middle class continues to grow, so does the demand for high-quality products. And a digital way of doing business allows our companies to gain greater access to targeted markets to these consumers, and it's opening the door for an inclusive way of doing business. At the end of the day, selling more is good for business, and this is good for Atlantic Canada. We value the opportunity to create connections and partnerships that showcase what we have to offer to the global marketplace. Nous apprécions la possibilité de créer des connexions et des réseaux qui illustrent ce que nous pouvons offrir au marché mondial. China continues to be a priority market as we look for ways to grow our economy and enhance trade. Over the last 4 years, we have been actively working with our Chinese partners to understand how to best conduct business in this key market, and many of those great partners are here today. And I want to thank you and our speakers for bringing the expertise and insights to help prepare our businesses in leveraging this opportunity. I wish you a great day full of opportunity, conversation, and future success. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Laurel. At Nova Scotia Business Inc., we work very closely with our Trade Commissioner friends. They help identify opportunities, provide business insights, and establish connections that help our companies navigate international markets. I would now like to ask David Duncurley to introduce the next piece of our agenda. David is a Counsel and Trade Commissioner at Canada's Consulate General in Shanghai. He spent the past 8 years working in China and the past 12 years in Asia. Having served previously at Canadian embassies in Beijing and Manila, his particular interest in the China market has been e-commerce, where he leads Global Affairs Canada efforts for promoting exporting opportunities for Canadian SMEs. Prior to joining Global Affairs in 2005, David worked in the financial services industry, including with TD Securities, Canaccord Capital, and the Royal Bank of Scotland in London. So, David.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be back in Halifax. I'd like to start by thanking Darlene, wherever she is. Darlene's been a terrific support for this event. This is the third roadshow we've done in Canada. This is our third stop. And it's the first one we've done outside of Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver, the major centers. So we're very happy to be here, and particularly I'd like to thank Darlene. I'd also like to invite up my colleague, Emily Yao, to join us on the stage. I think... I'm sure there's people here who were at CIIE back in November as part of AGS. You probably talked to Emily. Emily's been an outstanding service to us at the consulate in Shanghai, and she's now the leader of the e-commerce team at the consulate. So she's going to present us a few slides in a moment. But first, I'd like to play a greeting from our boss, Weldon, the Consul General. He was just here in Halifax, I think a few weeks ago. He wanted to open this event, but the dates didn't quite work out. And he's been a terrific support and driver of the e-commerce file for us at the consulate. He's secured new resources, and we're now well equipped to deal with clients entering the market. So I'll play a little video here that we did back in Shanghai.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, my name is Weldon. I'm Consul General of Canada here in Shanghai. I actually just returned to Shanghai only a couple weeks ago from Halifax and St. John's, where I had a whole range of excellent meetings with so many of our Canadian companies that are exporting to China. And today's event, which is this e-commerce event in Halifax, is an incredibly important partnership. And I just wanted to begin by thanking all of our partners, whether ACOA, whether our team on the ground, or my team from the consulate with GAC, with the provincial governments, as well as in particular Alibaba and web presence in China. It's very important to us to be able to work with key partners to bring together kind of a winning team to explain how e-commerce in China works and to help create opportunities for more of you to leverage that platform to bring your top quality products to this market. Food products from Atlantic Canada are particularly popular in China, as you may be aware, but actually the Chinese consumer has broad tastes, is very demanding, is looking for quality consumer products across the range. And we think that today's event and e-commerce in general can be one part of making more of Canada available to demanding Chinese consumers with very global appetites. I want to just take a moment to introduce a really important tool that the consulate team has put together and used over the last couple of years, and I'm just holding a copy of it here. It's the Introduction to E-commerce in China. It's a fairly comprehensive guide talking about the demographics, talking about the consumer landscape, major players, and introducing how the regulatory environment for e-commerce in China works. It's in French and English. This is actually the current version, version 2, but a new version is almost about to be issued. And our team on the ground will talk about that, but I encourage you to look for it online, either the existing version or the one that will be updated within a few weeks. And take advantage of that and other tools of the Trade Commissioner Service to support your opportunities here in China. I also, with that, want to just mention that you have with you in Halifax the most expert team in the Government of Canada on e-commerce, and that's a couple of my colleagues, David Dunkeley and Emily Yao. They're there with you for a reason. We want them there on the ground to take time to meet you, take your questions on, and make sure you meet our friends from Alibaba and Web Presence in China. And hopefully through today's event, we'll see more of you coming our way in Shanghai soon. So with that, let me offer my congratulations and best wishes to all the participants, to all of our partners. Have a great day and come our way soon. Take care.
I'd like to point out, I should point out two other members of the Global Affairs Canada team who are here. Christine Smith's our STC in the office here in Halifax, but also Roxanne Amel, wherever she is here. Maybe she can, here she is. She's been a terrific support also on the e-commerce file, is very knowledgeable and can answer a lot of your questions. Regarding the book, please do come and see Emily and I about that. It's an excellent document. It's in its third iteration now. It's being renewed every year. The landscape is changing in China quickly, and fortunately, we've been able to update it on a regular basis. Alibaba's contributed to it. I think Joseph may have contributed to it as well. WPIC, our main speaker today. So please do come and see Emily and I about that. At this point, I'll ask Emily to do a short introduction of our services in China.
Thanks, David. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Emily. I'm the Trade Commissioner based in the consulate in Shanghai. I'm responsible for e-commerce. So first of all, a big thank you again to all the partners who have made every effort to put together today's event. It's great to come to Halifax to meet with all the companies from Atlantic Canada, and just a brief introduction to Trade Commissioner Service. So Trade Commissioner Service is a global network. We work with all the partners in the province from different federal government departments to help Canadian companies navigate through the complexity of international markets. So we now have a global network, about 160 offices in worldwide, and I'm personally based in Shanghai. We also have a team in Shanghai. We also have teams in Shanghai and other major cities in China. What about Trade Commissioner Service? I'm sure that there are companies here that we have worked in the past, and we hope to see more coming to the international to explore the international markets. In terms of our services, the Trade Commissioner Service, first of all we provide recommendations. We share market information, intelligence to help Canadian companies prepare for the international markets. Also, we have teams on the ground to help you make connections and provide services. That's part of the reason we are here, to bring our guests, bring our market expertise, like what presence in China, and also we have great partnership with leading players in the market to help Canadian companies enter and expand in the local market. As mentioned, that we are globally present, and in terms of the China market, we have embassy in Beijing, and we have consulates in major cities like Shanghai, Guangzhou, Chongqing, and Hong Kong. Plus, we also have smaller trade offices in 10 second-tier cities in China. So anytime if you come to China, feel free to contact the Trade Commissioner Service. We also to quickly mention that about the Can Export program. So this is an initiative provided by the Trade Commissioner Service of Global Affairs Canada to provide financial support for our small and medium-sized companies to explore new export opportunities. So there is funding available to help you explore the international markets. If you haven't heard of that, or if you have any questions about this program, feel free to contact us, contact the colleagues based in Halifax. This has been mentioned a few times, but I'd like to mention again that we do have this very comprehensive tool to help our companies who are looking into the market, who are in the stage of preparing your strategy for e-commerce in China. We do encourage you to get a copy, and just to note, if you have already seen this version, we are working on the updated version, which will come out soon, hopefully this summer. So feel free to come to David and us. We'll be happy to share you an e-link in both French and English. Yeah, so that's my short intro on TCS. There will be one-on-one meetings in the afternoon, and I look forward to discussing further details with you. Thank you.
We'll be around throughout the day. I look forward to talking to people here. I recognize a lot of faces. I should also mention our colleague Claire Chen, who covers agri-food out of the consulate in Shanghai. I suspect some of you here know Claire and the great work she does. So I encourage you to get in contact with us back in China. Our first speaker today is Joseph Cook from WPIC. No, there's been a change. Our next speaker is... My apologies. Sorry, Alan.
I'm Alan Kinney. I'm manager of international business development at ACOA head office in Moncton, New Brunswick, and I'm here to introduce the next speaker. The Canada-China Business Council, it's a non-profit, membership-based organization that has been the leading voice for Canada-China business for the last 40 years. There are 6 chapters currently in Shanghai, Beijing, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and Calgary, and I'm very pleased to say very shortly here in Atlantic Canada, based right here in Halifax. André-Philippe Chanaille is visiting with us here today from the Quebec chapter, although he's also been very active in Atlantic Canada, helping out whenever we've needed him. And he's currently the director for the Quebec chapter, and he's also held that position in Shanghai. So, André-Philippe.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here in Halifax, snowy Halifax. I just work on my setup. My presentation today, I wanted to find a place in between very informative and briefings from the TCS services you can retrieve from governmental partners, as well as detailed how-to and strategy from Alibaba and WPIC. And so we decided to present everyone with a bit of context on how technology is actually affecting Chinese citizens or netizens' everyday lives, and giving you a bit of images and stories to understand really how China is actually right now in the realm of technologies, literally leapfrogging with Chinese characteristics. And what does that mean? So, technology, it was as if I walked into a sci-fi movie a couple of decades into the future. What we talk about here is happening in China. I had a vague sense of this, but to see it made it real. It is smart. The people are smart. The people who choose to live here are smart. The people who choose to live there who are not from there are smart. The pace is firm fast. There is exciting beyond belief. The capacity to accomplish unfathomable. These quotes are from a delegation of journalists who accompanied CCBC on a worldwide tour of China in July 2018. Many Canadians would feel totally lost in a Chinese city, and it wouldn't just be a language issue. They simply wouldn't have the knowledge and the skills to jump right into the electronic life that the locals take for granted. Never mind what it will be like in 5 years. So where do people get the idea that China is behind us? Take urban mass transit. We dig tunnels and we dig tunnels and fill them back up. Toronto has spent decades trying to get subways and light rail system up and running, and in a recent referendum, Vancouver refused a big step forward in mass transit. Montreal is doing a bit better, mostly because the Caisse de dépôt already invest in mass transit systems around the world on behalf of Quebec pensioners. But still, it will be years before we see modern mass transit in most Canadian cities. Now look at this animated gift from China. It shows the progress of subway lines in Chinese city from 1990 to 2020. Less than 20 years ago, only Beijing, Guangzhou, and Shanghai had any subways. You can see that now Shanghai tops 600 kilometers of metro lines. This is huge, only in Shanghai. So from 1991 up to 1992, I think it's worthwhile to look just at how those lines are actually in every city are multiplying. We're going to go up to, I think, 2018. So today there are more than 60 metro lines in 25 Chinese cities, providing access to almost 300 million people. The ultra-fast, ultra-modern systems are enough to make you and me intensely jealous. They send a powerful signal about China's role in modern global economy. They may also trigger a debt headache down the line, since subways cost about 9 times as much as surface light rail, but that too is a story familiar to Canadians. Back in the late 1980s, there was only a handful of places where foreigners could go to have dinner or lunch. Beijing's winter dining was, let's say, very heavy on cabbage, and cabbage. There was no concept of customer service. At the Hong Kong airport, you could buy a t-shirt that said, "Welcome to China" on the front, and on the back said, "Now go home." Well into the 1990s, there was a big glass case with snacks and chips at the Beijing airport. But could you persuade the surly attendant to sell them to you? Not a chance. The attitude was, it's just easier if you don't buy them. I tell you these stories to underline how dramatically China has changed in a very short time. This is a country that has raised its standard of living 8-fold in 30 years. It took Japan 80 years to do that, and the United States 122. In the past 4 decades, China has achieved a level of urbanization and industrialization that took 2 centuries in the West. The New York Times recently interviewed 49-year-old Xu Liya, a former wheat farmer from rural Zhejiang in eastern China. She once shared a bedroom with 7 relatives and ate meat only once a week. Then she was able to go to university on a scholarship, and she opened a clothing store. Now she has 2 cars, a $300,000 apartment, and a daughter at college in Beijing. Over the past 35 years, as many as 500 million people had opportunities like these. Imagine the astounding adaptability of this population. As a people, the Chinese may be the most willing to embrace change in the history of the world. This is a huge asset for the country. Many Canadians see technology change as a job killer. They're less resilient. The Chinese experience is different. As long as they work incredibly hard for very long hours, their kids have a crack at higher education and good careers. The kids still have to work incredibly hard for long hours, by the way, to study for countrywide competitive exams. This thirst for training, the propensity to do the right thing, and that iron will to succeed have opened up a market for extracurricular tutoring that is worth more than $150 billion a year. Quite a few Canadian teachers are among the 60,000 in 35 countries hired by a Chinese education tech company, VIP to teach English to more than 500,000 kids. They make up $22 US per hour, mostly early morning, when Chinese kids are at home after school with 12 hours difference. With a population of 1.4 billion people, even a niche market, say price-sensitive women in fifth-tier cities, can generate enough revenue to make a profit, often providing goods and services that would have been unimaginable luxuries 20 or 30 years ago. Think about Chinese shopping and payment systems. This huge population generates a massive amount of real-time data, a gold mine and a huge competitive asset for China. But there's much more. CCBC brought that group of Canadian journalists to Beijing Friendship Hospital in July 2018. We were amazed at how much had changed. Back in 2012, a Chinese friend had to go on her bike at 9 a.m. to take a number that would ensure her son could see an eye doctor after school at 3 p.m. Now, in 2018, all was totally automated, showing your health card and making appointments using your mobile phone or website. The clinic still accommodated elderly people at a walk-up window or by phone, but most people were signing in and paying their bills at a machine, getting seamless coordinated care right down to the pharmacy, where their prescription showed up automatically for pickup or delivery. So does that sound like your healthcare experience? Chinese people take using advanced mobile apps for granted, buying groceries, managing their electricity and water utilities, taking out microloans, sharing bikes, hailing rides, and much more. Think of the breadth and depth of usable data this generates on hundreds of millions of people. Not just their online search behaviors, but every aspect of their lives through their street sensors, facial recognition, geolocation, and the power of all-in-one apps like WeChat. This constant stream of multiple data points is building an advanced digital economy and society in astonishing leaps and bounds, leaving the rest of the world in the dust. If data is the new oil, China is the Saudi Arabia of data. 20 years ago, there were no Chinese internet company in the global top 20 by market cap. 5 years ago, there were 5. Today, 9 of the top 20 are Chinese. And if you believe the old stereotype that China imitates and doesn't innovate, think again. China is pioneering social e-commerce. There's nothing like Xiaomi, for example, in North America or Europe. Here's a company that started out improving Samsung phones by tweaking battery life and software. Based on the modest successes, Xiaomi started making its own phone. And within 5 years, it had jumped to the #2 spot in China, just behind Apple. With its own phone and all of those software refinements, Xiaomi blurred the lines between product development and manufacturing by engaging users to power further improvements. Soon, all those engaged customers felt they were contributing and making a difference, and Xiaomi has become a huge software and consumer service company with loyal following tied tightly to its offering. There's a lot to learn from that model. McKinsey calls this innovation through commercialization, an idea that goes through many incremental changes resulting in something uniquely Chinese, and what the author of The Girl with the Baggage Claim, Jen Gish, calls organic, morphing, responsive, network, and decentralized. Former President of China, Deng Xiaoping, is also famously quoted as saying, "Cross the river by feeling the stone." So the e-commerce platforms offers a unique form of ultimate consumer democratization that facilitates constant improvement of products and services. So the average Chinese person feels his or her voice is being heard through their purchasing decisions, and this is important. Chinese consumers have choices beyond what we can imagine, with the corresponding feeling of empowerment. Increasingly, they are demanding quality as well. China is harnessing its massive purchasing powers of hundreds of millions of people to transform its economy from investment and export-led growth to consumption and technology. And the government knows it needs to keep people happy and healthy, and it constantly surveys the population to make sure it's on the right track. Where many Westerners see a dystopian surveillance and lack of individual human rights, most Chinese people feel they're working together to improve life of everyone. And they value harmony and collective purpose. Many feel it is appropriate for troublemaker to be sanctioned. What we often fail to understand is how quickly such a focused collective society can change its own destiny. Yes, unchecked development can cause terrible air quality in large Chinese cities. But once people began to demand clean air and the government decided to address this, blue skies returned over Beijing within just 2 or 3 years. The crisis of trust in the quality and safety of the food supply has created pressure for transparency and business opportunities for foreign suppliers. So our group of journalists saw video displays, also known as magic mirrors, above grocery store produces, that show the origin of the fruits and vegetables, how they were grown, their nutritional value, and how to cook them. You could scan a QR code on a bunch of grapes to give you the information. There are also in restaurants now sets of cameras displayed on a television in the dining room that shows you live what is going on in the kitchen. And so it happened to me actually in last November, walking into a famous Beijing restaurant, which I really liked. I had been there for many times, but seeing that they had installed this television that I could see into the kitchen, I actually turned back, and I'm not sure if I will ever go back. So these systems rely on blockchain and RFID technologies to track products through their life cycles. You can download recipes and pay for the produce all through your smartphones. If we had such system in place here, we could still safely enjoy our Roman lettuce. Now, think of the implications, right? For consumers, of course, but also for everyone in the supply chain. If you can't provide the information Chinese consumers demand and meet their very high service expectations, you won't be selling your products in China. Meanwhile, the government is tackling the trust and safety problem head-on. Supervision of food imports will become more efficient and stringent with comprehensive inspections and scrutiny. This is the word of the government, literally. Especially for chemical residues and the logistics of controlling temperatures throughout their life cycles. China is looking for innovative technologies to supervise these processes through data-driven traceability, another business opportunity. So China now has over 800 million people on the internet, more than the entire population of the US, Europe, and Japan combined. WeChat has more than 1 billion people, users, not as big as Facebook, but pretty ubiquitous in China. Consumers now enjoy incredible choices. You can get almost anything you want delivered to your door within about an hour. And Chinese people live their entire lives on WeChat, which integrates instant messaging, social entertainment, video calls, photo sharing, games, consumers, mobile payments, and more. We could say banking, insurance, travel, education, stocks, options, name it. In 2016, more than a third of WeChat users reported spending more than 4 hours a day on the platform. So about the same as the average Canadian spends watching television. So you're either on your phone or you're asleep. Unlike here, every urban street merchant and most beggars in China can now take payment through a QR code scanned into a smartphone. It's becoming harder and harder to use cash, which is increasingly viewed as dirty and primitive. A friend of mine who recently traveled to Shanghai says the maid simply fingered a cash tip left on the hotel bed. And I must say that Hangzhou, where Alibaba is based, is probably the most cashless city you will find in China, where Hangzhou citizens take pride into having a cashless city, a city at the edge of technology. If you're traveling to China, you'll need to be on WeChat or Alipay with preloaded cash on your phone through a Chinese bank account or a workaround of some kind. Honestly, it's even tough to get a cab without the right app, because every cab is actually going to find a client which has ordered its cab on the app. So if you're walking in the streets, they're just passing by, they're not picking you up. So meanwhile, Chinese travelers are now the world's biggest spenders. Take a look at these charts. They're expected to top 200 million visitors by 2020, and they're often quite underwhelmed by crumbling North American public infrastructures and primitive payment systems. And after you've seen theirs, how can you blame them? Chinese consumers are also the world's largest buyers of luxury goods, which are cheaper abroad than at home by a margin of about 30%. So, Tourism Toronto once found a creative way to address the payment challenge. Stores at the Yorkdale Mall weren't yet enabled on WeChat or Alipay, but needed to service a large visiting Chinese delegation. So working with OTT Financial, a CCBC member providing WeChat payment services, Yorkdale became a client, setting up a VIP room at Yorkdale where the Chinese delegates could buy Yorkdale Shopping Center gift cards using WeChat Pay. And the gift cards can be redeemed at any of the mall's merchant. Yorkdale sold $5 million in gift cards to this one Chinese delegation in under 3 hours. So figuring it out pays, literally. So there are so many opportunities, but in order to succeed with Chinese consumers, Canadians literally need to wake up and smell the coffee. So speaking of coffee, naturally, Tim Hortons recently announced that it will open 1,500 new stores in China, with its first store opened in Shanghai a few weeks ago. Starbucks already has over 3,300 stores in China, and a new Starbucks open every 15 hours in China. We'll skip the few statistics on coffee to dive deep into these items. There are many Canadian firms with expertise in areas that hold great promises in China. So these 12 items are from APCO, a global consulting firm, who publish a comprehensive list of things to watch for in China. So Beautiful China is a code for sustainable development, higher quality schools, world-class universities, hospitals, and high-quality healthcare. Plenty of Canadian expertise there. President Xi has set a 2035 as a target for safeguarding the environment. So if you have low-carbon technologies, pollution control, waste disposal, or a circular economy model, you could do very well in China in the coming years. Electric vehicle sales surpassed 500,000 in 2017. China already has more EVs than the US and the EU combined. They expect to sell more than 1 million this year as part of a smog reduction effort in cities suffering from chronic and massive air pollution. So China offers tax rebates on the purchase of EVs while positioning itself to innovate in this key industry of the future, led by its domestic manufacturer, BAIC, Beijing Auto, and BYD, who's based in Guangdong. Canada's own Manga signed a joint venture in June 2018 to start manufacturing entire electric vehicles in China, as it does in Austria for various brands. So China is also linking up megacities by high-speed train, reducing commuting time between Shanghai and various cities in the Yangtze River Delta from 6 hours to 2.5. Imagine what that does to create a readily accessible market and heighten productivity. Our governments turned down investments deal because we don't want China to have our technology, but we would be naive to assume that we can keep China from pursuing its goals. As the US tries to prevent Chinese companies from buying up American technology, it's no wonder that China is pursuing self-reliance rather than integration with global technology standard. So its sheer size and laser focus on technological development makes China a Shangri-La for machine learning and artificial intelligence. So in July this year, it sets out the next generation artificial intelligence development plan, a roadmap to build $1 trillion AI sector by 2030. This makes sense given the vastness of the data pool available for machine learning. So China's sharing economy has been spectacularly successful domestically and starting to expand abroad internationally, despite some high-profile bike sharing bankruptcies. Shared access to bicycles is changing people's lives, as you can now rent a bike on literally every street corner to close what we call the last mile issue. So how do you make the last mile, the last 2 kilometers to your destination? You take a bike. So you've probably noticed that printers are now cheap because they're just the hook to sell you expensive cartridges. Well, for the bikes, the real value is in the data. So they make it real cheap for you to ride the bike. The data is pretty amazing and provide great guidance where to put a new Subway or Starbucks franchises, for example. So turning to entertainment quickly, expect the global industry to look more Chinese in the coming future. With runaway successes like Wolf Warrior 2 and booming mobile entertainment, more than $25 billion in domestic mobile gaming revenues last year, and more live streaming than in the US, the entertainment industry is a big growth story. So everybody is watching their phones, and Canada is well positioned to benefit from that industry. We have over 60 co-production treaties and MOUs with other countries, so a great opportunity lies there. And China Internet Plus policies go far beyond entertainment. While the development I've been describing are clearly profitable for the big internet companies, they're also well aligned with the goals of the Chinese state to improve people's lives. So how can we stay competitive and leverage the market opportunities that China offers without losing ground? That's precisely the area CCBC addresses. We fight to ensure that China's market is open to fair competition and to inform Canadians about how best to work with Chinese partners. We should expect our governments to communicate the values that we hold dear and to hold Chinese investors in our country to those same expectations. So where we have important issues that we can and should be addressed in multilateral forums, we should ensure that our governments and associations resolve them. We can't afford to pass up the opportunity to engage with the rising China and its vast and growing market, but we need to engage intelligently and to avoid being surprised. If anything I told you today is new to you, we've already achieved part of the goal. China invests a great deal in learning about us, right? Let me underline that. China invests a great deal in learning about us, and we need to do the same. Be informed, educate yourself, learn about the profound differences in culture and mindset, and don't take everything at face value. Seek out information beyond your current sources. Understand your sector, understand the goal China has that may affect you and your business in the next 5 to 10 years. Move fast, then slowly move faster. So thank you.
Token of our appreciation. Thanks very much. Thanks. David, up next. Thanks.
Thank you, AP. Our next speaker is Joseph Cook. He's from WPIC Web Presence in China. I first met Joseph a few years ago, actually at a CCBC event, AP, in Shanghai. Since that time, he's worked closely with us in the Trade Commissioner Service. He's worked with Agri-Food Canada, producing research guides for them on e-commerce in China. He founded the company 14 years ago with his brother Jacob. It's unique in that it's a Canadian company whose primary business is in China, although they've now expanded and have offices all over the world. I think they're up to 13 offices. They're very capable. It's a fascinating presentation, and I highly recommend asking questions, being engaged. It's a lot of information, and I hope you enjoy it. This is the third time Joseph's presented with us on this tour, and I can tell you from the previous stops, it's been very interesting and I think informative for those in the room. WPIC, it's a full-service digital IT, data analytics, and market entry consultancy. You'll learn more about it in the presentation, but they do more than just act as a TP. And yeah, I think I can, with that, introduce Joseph Cook.
Good morning, everybody. I'm pleased to be here. I'm coming in from Vancouver, where I reside about half the time, and then the other half of the time on the road and in China, where I've lived for a number of years and done a fair amount of work out there. What we'll talk about today is going to cover a large number of topics, from data and how these things can relate to you, and I'll go through some of the data we've been doing for various organizations over the years, and we've tried to cast a bit of a wide net so we can touch on a lot of topics that hopefully most of the folks here understand the subject matter, for that's where they're involved. I'll test on that. So like I said, I'm based out of Vancouver half the time. I've been with David Dunkerley and Emily Yao on this Eastern Canadian tour. First time to Atlantic Canada. We spent the day in New Brunswick yesterday. We spoke to about a dozen companies there. We had some dialogue about what they were trying to do, the various challenges they were seeing. companies of all sizes looking at China, looking at the market, trying to figure out what to do, what should I do, how much is this going to cost, what kind of revenue should we go after, what are the complexities, should we find partners, is a distributor the right way to go, should we go on a trade mission, how do we earmark precious capital, we can't afford to swing and miss, what are we going to do inside this market? And what we've been trying to do is just help provide a little bit of clarity, nudge some organizations in different directions that maybe just help them push the initiative a little bit further down the road. And in some cases, the data's not there to support market entry, and thus maybe convincing the company that maybe a China business plan really isn't that profitable for them inside the market. So I'll set a little bit of baseline just generally in terms of who we are. As David had said, we're 15, 16 odd years old inside the market. We built the company originally as a digital services company. We saw some pretty robust changes with the firewall that wraps up the market, so that led to all sorts of blockages in China. Anyone who's joined a trade mission or been involved inside the market, you try and check a Gmail, it's challenging. You try to look at Facebook, it's challenging. And those are sort of like the surface level complexities. We operate more in the back end where we see complexities around things like CRM blockages, companies that might use softwares like an Adobe software or perhaps something like Salesforce. These are the softwares that break down inside the market. This is where we get data loss. This is what typically prevents companies overseas to be able to transact and go direct inside the market. And so we built large-scale IT solutions, simply middleware to connect what you're doing in the West with what the buyer in China wants so that we can help organizations go a little bit more direct. We built a decent footprint over those years, sort of classic APAC locations. Beijing's still where our headquarters is. Nanjing is where our general e-commerce operation is, our customer service outfit, our warehousing systems are in there. Shanghai, Hong Kong, Tokyo, we've just built a lab in Osaka as well. Vancouver, where I'm spending half my time, and down the coast in San Francisco as well. And we've been working with, 350, 400 odd companies, maybe more, maybe less over the years. Large-scale companies, small-scale companies, everything in between, working with big kind of multidisciplinary conglomerates like the Danahers and Honeywells who are trying to fit out the country with things like blood gas analyzers, mass spectrometers, fit out hospitals with diagnostics equipment on a very large scale, the big backbone infrastructural stuff that typically paves the way for then long-tail retail and consumerism to take place. And then small individual companies who just want to go to market, who want to roll out, who want to build, who want to secure $500,000 in revenue, maybe that first $1 million US in revenue, maybe 30, 40, 50, $60 million in revenue. Maybe they've been with a distributor and now they want to go direct. Maybe they want to retain margin. They want to get more control of their market. The consumers in China are demanding a better connection with the brand themselves. And so all different shapes and sizes. Size doesn't really matter when it comes to the companies that we're working with. And what we'll talk about today are the mechanics are virtually identical, regardless of if we're dealing with a $125 billion company and a company that just needs to knock out their first 100K in revenue inside the market. And a lot of the mechanics are basically the same. We've been fairly sector agnostic with who we've been working with. I know there's agri folks in the room. I think there's some apparel, maybe some consumable, different companies. I'll try and touch on all of it. Raise a hand if you want me to go deeper to any of the particular type of data that I'm going to go into, and maybe we have a little bit of insights that we can offer. So the first half of what we're going to talk about is going to be all about strategic intel, strategic data. From where you sit and you look at the market, it's a lot of questions, probably getting very little answers, a lot of misinformation, just mega gray matter out there with what's legit and what's not. What do we hear? We hear things like 800 million people are online, mega billions of dollars of revenue, 11/11, a lot of exciting things and a lot of big numbers, but your lane isn't China, right? Your lane is those who want to pay $30 a kilogram for whatever the product is, who are prepared to pay $45 for this organic topical and are prepared to wait 15 days for it to be delivered. That's your lane. That's where you operate. That's the number that matters. And that could be a market size that's maybe only $1 million a year, $4 million a year, $400 million a year. I think it's important to know what that market size is and what consumers in the market are prepared to pay and wait and what your competitors are doing. And in the first half of this, we're going to focus basically on this platform called Descripto that we built. And Descripto, in its highest application, basically downloads the Chinese internet. And this is the kind of work that we might do for like a hedge fund on Wall Street that want to go long or short, generally on the market as a whole, or it's an individual company who is just saying, what's the size of my market and what's the customer acquisition cost? Is it going to cost me $30 per customer or 30 cents? And I need to know. And what's that general cash conversion cycle going to be when I start putting inventory inside the market? When am I going to start to see some returns coming out? And so we got big application stuff with a hedge fund. We have small application stuff with maybe an individual company that can't afford to swing and miss. And then somewhere in the middle, we'll do work with, Agri-Canada and the Agri-Foods Group and helping them understand total market receipt value of all foods pre- and post-processed online for maybe like the last 5 or 6 or 7 years. And we're going to bring some of that data here today. And that's useful for an organization to know that I export apples or seafood or a particular type of seafood or lobster or shellfish or dried raisins or dried cherries, blueberries, fresh product, dried product, and what does that market look like inside the market, inside China. So we'll talk a bit about that. Then in the second half of this, what we'll do is we'll go into more implementation and tactical examples about how organizations have taken that data, reflected on it, built a plan, built a target, allocated some capital, and deployed inside. Other specialties that we have are around tech development, big application stuff, large-scale e-commerce development, native-based work, taking massive, robust stacks that maybe have to handle large volumes of capital, big consumer data, tracking of inventory, integrations to warehouse, and building direct builds for companies to set up inside the market. And then sometimes it's just a site or a landing page, just to simply drive some users to a page where they can learn about what it is that you're doing, and they can get in touch. And that might be attracting a distributor or a buyer or a dealer or an end user to basically come and get in touch with some of you. And that's what we're doing inside of our lab. Our Chinalytics division, for anybody who operates anything in the digital space, maybe use tools like Google Analytics, generally the gold standard with analytics tracking in the West. We have issues with Google. Google's clearly blocked inside the market. Google Analytics has major data disruption as it transmits through the firewall. So we launched something called Chinalytics a few years back. It's a China-hosted web analytics platform. We run a decent amount of volume across it on a daily basis. This becomes really useful when we get a good cross-section of metadata and microdata to get ideas of what people are using inside the market for softwares. So if you're hiring a web developer to develop your website, they might want to know that in China, on any particular day, maybe 10% of users are using Internet Explorer 6. Web developers need to know this. Nobody develops websites in the West for Internet Explorer 6, but maybe 10% of the market, maybe 80% of your market is within that 10% using Internet Explorer 6. So these types of nodes we find to be fairly useful. And then the legacy business is web presence in China. And this is all things digital, right? Activating e-commerce, managing Tmall stores, managing Jingdong stores, running traffic to a website, to an e-commerce store, search, social, all the different types of content management tools that can be used inside the market. So we can sort of generally put the whole thing together generally, and how we're trying to support on either like a full-scale level or a modular level is run with the data, do the planning. When somebody comes to us and they say, we want to go to China, first question, how much does it cost? It's not the right question to ask. The right question to ask is how much money do you want to make? And what's the target from the client side? What's the target from the brand side? Because if your business plan is $100,000 US in year one, that's a very different business plan than a company that says, I want to do 25 million in year one, right? If we have $100,000 in year one, it might be one deal with one dealer making one purchase and that's it. If the business plan is to do 25 million a year, we might be able to go to our friends in Alibaba and set up a Tmall store and do 18 of that 25 inside their ecosystem, and now we need to go find the 7 million somewhere else. And so understanding what the target is then dictates what the business plan is. And this is what we're doing inside Descripto in its entirety, really. And answering that very first question is, what should the revenue target be? And a lot of times we don't really know, right? The more the merrier, the more. Well, we need to make that a little bit more definitive, and so this helps us understand a $100,000 revenue target equals a business plan that looks like this, and a $10 million business plan looks like this. And that helps organizations understand we have option A, we have option B, and C. And what are the mechanics, and what kind of bandwidth and investment is going to be required from your side to be able to realize some of that. We're doing a lot of merch setup as well through our licenses and our organizations and our setup throughout the market. Look at this as like a proxy, right? It's challenging a lot of times for a lot of companies when they look at the market and they say, we want to go to China, what do? Do we find a distributor, and do we just give away half our margin just like that and not retain brand control, not retain margin inside the market? Or do we find somebody else to go and partner with and basically give away control? Do we go to market direct and set up a wholly foreign-owned enterprise, bring 100, 200, 300K in registered capital to the market and start to earmark that, have authorized general managers for the market, get local bank accounts, local licenses, all the nodes you start to add up? Just doing your licensing might take a year and a lot of capital. And while you're deploying that capital, you're making nothing back inside the market. So what we've been trying to do with sort of general e-store merch setup is say, why don't you just proxy off of us? Until which point you've hit enough inertia, maybe your first 100K in revenue, maybe your first $500,000, maybe your first $1 million. And at that point, it makes sense to then go and set registered capital systems up inside the market, hire your first employee, take on the complexities of domestic payroll. But until then, maybe all we want to do is set up, go direct, drive revenue, and build inertia to validate a longer play business model. So this is what we're doing inside of our general merch proxy setup. This happens on a large scale, whether or not we're working with our friends over at Alibaba to just proxy to get you guys on the platform, or JD, or whether it's simply like an ICP license, which is a license plate for a website, which you need in order to host content inside the website. So if you want to have a Chinese website, somebody has to go to the Ministry of Information, the body that regulates and oversees the web, and register that domain so that if there's ever some kind of published content that may be sensitive inside China, pick your topic, the ministry is going to want to call somebody and say, take it down, right? So compliance, things like that, which are small, this is where we can help with some of this just skip to solution type methodology. And then we have to bring product inside the market. So being an importer of record, again, is another way to just sort of skip to solution, not have a lot of complexity. Different products may be better, may flow better through different ports of entry, right? Up the north, down in the south, the costs involved, freight forwarders, cross-dockers, what's this going to take? So we're doing a lot in sort of just the movement of product in and out of the market as well. A lot of people get product produced inside China. They have a manufacturer somewhere out there. Do they have a Class 9 retail license? Can they send their product direct from their manufacturing facility to our warehouse? Are they licensed to do that? If not, do we have to send the product to Hong Kong, repatriate it, and bring it back in? Best port of entry to do that, the fastest, the cheapest, the most seamless, the least complex, these kinds of things, right? So just movement on the ground of product is a pretty useful thing as well. And again, trying to just take the burden off of the Canadian company that's looking at this huge mountain that needs to be climbed, right? Can we just find quick, simple solutions to get product to end user? Then we get into things around localization and front-end creative and design and things like this. Organizations, again, are asking, how local do we need to get? We've spent a lot of time, a lot of money. We've built a good position in the West. We've built a really solid brand. You've spent your entire life basically building what this is, and you have this cherished market position of what you've done. So the question is, when we go to China, what do we need to do, right? Do we have to localize it? There was a time when people were thinking that they had to have things like dragons and red and gold and all these types of like localized colors. Well, maybe that was never really the case from our position, what you needed to do, but certainly today there's been a maturing in consumer behavior that what is the consumer after? They're after a more legit, authentic, Western brand, Canadian brand that's going to hold true to what that position is. Not come in, not discount, right? Not go super local, right? There's a reason why the purchase is taking place for the foreign product, right? So the elements of this, having the data to back up that market position can be helpful. And so then really, do you need to have these super local creative design processes that unfold? Probably not. You can probably take exactly what you do and replicate inside the market. Then we get into back-end development and deployment, all the SKU localization, certain things to note when it comes to mechanics of platforms like Alibaba's Tmall and things like this. What we have found in the West is usually 1, 2, 3 photos, minimal data on the page so we can get somebody to click buy now is typically pretty sufficient. We have a fairly savvy, sophisticated, discerning buyer inside China. So, what we typically see is, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13 photos, product guides, ingredient lists, fabric material guides, any kind of safety information, any kind of stamp of local governments that have said this product's legit. That's typically what's going to be required inside the market as well. So localization of just the SKU level can sometimes boost conversion levels as well. We get into things around omni-channel marketing, marketing inside Alibaba, marketing inside Baidu, other platforms like this. The warehousing setup, getting your product on a shelf inside the market. We're doing a lot of this as well. Putting this kind of information and this product under local insurance, lock and key, under video camera, you can look at it any time. Can sometimes, again, just be a nice, quick, easy, simple solution to get things moving. And another overlooked part typically we see is we know minimum half the buyers inside China, when they go to your .cn or your Tmall store, we know half of them are going to want to engage in some kind of an online chat, some kind of interactivity, maybe pick up the phone. The product might only be $8, but the buyer wants to get it for $7.50, and are you prepared to negotiate for that deal? And that really needs to be a process that happens in about 6 or 7 seconds. So we can't have somebody running that off the side of their desk who's out in the warehouse. That needs to be a body sitting, looking, watching. A user comes in, time to engage, right? And again, this is capital. This costs capital to have the bodies to be able to do this, but this basically makes or breaks the last mile. You've paid for that user to come all the way to your checkout page. Now they're ready to check out. Don't abandon that user. That's really where we can take the conversions from 3% to 30 to 60% by just having some base level negotiations in there. And this is no joke. We'll see with some organizations that we work with who are selling, $20,000 road bikes, and then we have other organizations who are selling, dollar consumer products. That dollar consumer product might be a 1-minute conversation for $1, and a $20,000 road bike, that online chat interaction might go on for like 2 or 3 weeks. All day, and then it stops, next day, next day, next day, and so on and so forth. Get into things like kids products, baby products, where there's a mom buying for the child. Again, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, things like this. So, understanding this, the mechanics of how to run it, I think are really important. And we've been trying to really, offer some solutions to really have, direct to the point type things, and most importantly, reconciliation of the local taxation and all the issues around that, and then shooting Canadian dollars outside the market, right, for just a general full circle program in here. So that's the baseline. That's what we do. We've been doing it for a long time inside the market. We do it on a modular level, sometimes with just simply a word of advice, and sometimes more so in the entirety. So now we're going to go into some of the data here, and this is really going to be what the first half of what I'm going to talk about is. So we'll start big. We'll start really big with some of these big numbers around things like $21 billion of aggro. This is some of the work that we were doing with the AAFC to provide some insight in terms of what was moving inside the market. We can pull out snapshot data, quick data, where we see, movement of goods for different types of platforms, big macro snapshots that, quite frankly, are kind of useless, right? We can talk about, $250 million in a month's worth of sales, in a T-Mobile program. Fantastic numbers. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of capital. There's obviously a lot of liquidity inside the market to purchase. But again, where's your lane? What does this really mean for you, right? The feds were looking a little bit about, okay, well, where does Canada sit in all of this, right? We can look at things like, country of origin and go a little bit deeper. When we have mass scale revenue, who's really capitalizing on this revenue? And we can see, unfortunately, in a lot of cases on the right, what we were seeing was that, well, Canada tended to not really crack the top 5, right? So we had, little market segments where we had maybe 75 million US in transactions, and Canada was, lucky to break 80K in the month, right? So big opportunity, obviously, but we weren't seeing a lot of capitalization of what the market conditions really were. And then we can get into things around players in the market, platforms, and where that revenue was, right? And in most cases, what we'll see is a platform like T-Mobile have the dominance, in terms of revenue inside the market. So, all things being equal, it might make a lot of sense to then take a plan and roll out something inside T-Mobile, but we do have other platforms inside the market as well that have relevancy, and different platforms specialize in different things. We might have some platforms with huge market share, but with huge market share can also come heavy-duty competition, right? Where a customer might cost $1 or $4 to acquire that customer. We may have smaller platforms that are still multi-million, maybe multi-billion-dollar platforms that aren't as attractive, but then maybe they have a 10th of the competition or a 25th of the competition, and the customer acquisition cost now goes down to about 6 cents. Right? So understanding some of these types of things, and understanding what the makeup of the market is, can help drive a decision on where somebody wants to go. We can go a little bit deeper. This is an interesting example working with an Australian company exporting beef and wanting to export free-range beef and have full traceability of how can they bring beef from Australia direct from ranch right into China to the end user, and how can they have some level of authenticity and validate that the product's legit through the whole cycle of what it is. But they did have some challenges in what we were looking at. So the visibility might not be great here, but what we could see was they were pricing at a range of about $30 to $50 per kilogram based on what they were doing. And so we could look at the beef market as a whole, and this is really exciting. But then when we go a little bit deeper and we take a look at some lower levels, well, actually the price point where most of that revenue is far below what they can afford, and they cannot sell to the market for $20 a kg. They need to be priced a little bit more premium. That's the economics of their model. So this is now all of a sudden, that's where they are. That's their reality. Do they still go to market? Well, what else can we find inside the market that might provide some opportunities for them to capitalize on? So we can look at some of the characteristics, and we can look at what's being sold, how's it being sold, how's it being positioned, who's selling it, how much are they paying for those customers. And so up in the top, we could break things down in terms of grain and grass-fed, free-range and closed, look at Angus versus Wagyu, and look at the different species. And we had to keep going and going and going until ultimately what we found down here was a breakdown of beef that was processed in China, maybe Australian beef shipped in bulk and then processed in China, and then we had below it packaged in the country of origin. And what we found was that about, more than half of all the beef that was sold was all being promoted and branded as product that was being processed inside China, and we had roughly 5 or 6% of the entire beef market actually claiming and being able to prove that it was processed in country of origin. And this is where they found their big general opportunity of what they could do. Their general business plan was, if we can use blockchain technology, fancy talk for some level of technological traceability, to basically take product processed in Australia and sent through the whole supply chain to get it to end user with blockchain scanning at every step of the way. So these guys could actually be the only player inside the market, amplified and enabled programming on inside Jingdong, to have verified from country of origin, packaged out there, blockchain-based technologies, so that an end user can make the purchase, and when that product gets delivered to their house and they close the final chain, they can actually have the general confidence that the product they have is legit and organic and super free range and all the other sort of beautiful things that they've been spending all their life building in this family ranch. And that was really important to them, and they can maintain that position they've built in Australia and prove it and price it accordingly inside China. And then we can get into other sorts of different things as well around liters and cuts and all these, right? There's really no limit to the data that we can get. Andre Philippe talked about all the data collection that goes on inside the market. There's a lot of data outside, inside the platforms. One of the good benefits of the complexities of e-commerce with having to explain information, display info, is that then this data starts to get collected and you get these big bases. And we can use Descripto to go in to pull out some pretty interesting nodes around cut, right? And which cuts are moving and which cuts aren't, right? And we can then break that down into, you know, cuts of filet, grain-fed, free range, from Australia, from New Zealand, from Argentina, and then you can start to get into these micro areas, thus eventually identifying, this is my lane, this is my world, this is where I operate, and that market is this big, and this is how saturated that is in terms of competition. We can get into other interesting nodes around things like health, and we don't just look at information like e-commerce data. We like e-commerce data. This is real spend. These are real after-tax, hard-earned dollars that are being spent from the user inside the platforms. And we like that, and nothing speaks louder than that. We can look at mass market, you know, kind of macro GDP numbers of a country, but we want to know where somebody pulls their wallet out and where they spend. And when we add all that up, we start to get some pretty interesting stories that can be told. And for your world, when you get data that matches your lane, again, this makes a lot of sense for what you're doing. But we want to look outside of that as well, right? There's other indicators that we can find, and we might want to look at something like search data. So we all know Google's blocked inside China, so they have an equivalent tool called Baidu, virtually the same thing. And we want to look, and we built a little tool so we could pull out search queries. Basically, what are people typing inside China's Google over a period of time? And can we pull that information out to draw some general kind of clues and indicators of where the mindset is of the ultimate user? We know, generally speaking, that about half of all users start their internet browsing experience on Baidu.com. So Baidu provides a really, really deep, rich set of intel to help us understand where in the country people are starting to think. And we can break down the nodes to different parts inside the country to find out what people are looking for up to 5 or 6 years ago in certain regions around the country. So we pulled some data here. Here's a little sample from Jiangsu, right? Province just outside of Shanghai, roughly maybe give or take 100 million people, you know, in this general kind of catchment area in there. And we're looking at some information for nutraceutical companies and vitamin companies to give them some sense of what are people looking for when it comes to things around health, right? Obviously, we can look at ailments. We can look at information that help people, you know, understand, I have a cold, I'm short of breath, I'm often tired, and so on and so forth. You can get characteristics of that, right? The ailment-based searches to get some ideas of where the health of the market's going or the types of products that they're looking for. And at a high level, we can look at things like the change in search volume over a period of time that may help us understand the maturing of the consumer's knowledge of particular types of products. This is an example of things like vitamin C, grapeseed oil, grapeseed fish oil, protein powder, DHA, et cetera. And of course, what we see is, you know, what used to be very low search volume is now very high search volume. We can then break this down even deeper, and we were doing some analysis a while back for some honey companies, where we may have seen 1,000 searches a day for honey 5 or 6 years ago, and now we see 150,000 searches a day for honey today. And what does that mean? But then we can look deeper and look at things like clove honey, manuka honey, raw honey, searches before 0, and then maybe in 2013, 2014, we start seeing 100, 200, 3,000, 4,000, 7,500, and so on and so forth. So all of a sudden, a honey exporter based in whatever part of the country, and China was a total non-starter. Now all of a sudden, there's been this market that's been created. And maybe it was a company like Kraft who built the honey market. But what they've done is they've built a wake for education, and the search volume and the search queries typically give us insight on where the mindset of the user is to find out what it is. So to the Australian player, they can look for, you know, search queries around things like, you know, organic free-range beef processed in Australia, right? And these clues can help them validate, okay, maybe the market is now ready for me, or maybe the market just simply isn't. This is a reality that we look at around measuring load times inside the market. Inside the health space, we have lots of different players and general kind of micro marketplaces that play, right? We have companies like GNC that are big dominant players, iHerb, Vitacost, bodybuilding, et cetera, where folks are buying, you know, protein powder, or they're buying vitamin C, or they're buying any kind of general products that they want to find. There's basically 2 ways to do this, right? One way is that you take your website that you use in the West, that maybe is an informational website, maybe it's a full-on e-commerce website. So take that website, lift it up, deroute it, walk it over to China, register with the Ministry of Information, get a local domain, open up a hosting environment inside China, and drop that website inside the market behind the firewall. The result is that you load your website in basically 2 seconds. Applicable, reasonable, and acceptable load time, right? The wrong way to do it is to do a .com/cn translate the site yourself, or maybe hire some kind of technology that doesn't auto-translate, or be really clever and install like a Google Translate button up top. So you can say you're in China, and then they get some computer-generated version of Chinese, okay? And there's your result. Basically, now we load at 46 seconds, 26 seconds, 42 seconds, right? It's a total non-starter. So in their mind, in their office, they've ticked the China box in some way, shape, or form, right? They're dealing with what they need to do. Somebody in that office has a KPI of getting China going, and from their headspace, they're getting it. And the end result, typically from where we sit when we talk to organizations, is the market's not ready for us. We've tried it. We're doing the China thing, and we're not seeing the returns inside the market. Well, let's look at what it actually is. Let's make some real measurements there. So option B, let's go to one of the platforms, set it and forget it. Maybe find a partner. Maybe have a distributor who says, yeah, don't worry. We've got Tmall covered. We've got e-commerce covered. We'll handle it for you. Now, a distributor classically is not going to throw big capital at building your market. They're not going to throw big capital, write content, translate the essence of your brand, communicate your story, run ads, all the things that need to be done. All your friends from Alibaba here will tell you it's a competitive game. If you're going to play ball, you got to bring some capital to the table. You got to bring some elbow grease to the table. You got to bring some effort. You got to be prepared to play. Yeah, there's a lot of revenue out there, and there's also a lot of other players who are competing for that revenue. So we can get examples of players who have partners and distributors in the market, throw up a Tmall global store. There, the website with the translations didn't work, but now we're going to go on Tmall, and now that's going to work. But again, with the distributor partner, no ads. Maybe they're the ones saving money on the online chat, and they don't have that body sitting there full time, paying them a couple of grand a month, ready for that first person ready to buy the first bottle of vitamin C. They don't want to earmark that capital for it. The result, what do we get? Zero sales, zero, 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 zero. Okay? So they're in market. They're operating. Some of the mechanics are there. But on their P&L, they're dropping donuts basically across the board, right? So year one, let's do this fake Chinese website. Year two, let's go ultra cheap and cheerful, cut as many corners as possible and set it and forget it. Year two, no revenue. Year three, they're done, right? Out of China. And we see that a lot. So understanding the mechanics, understanding what the market really looks like, from our viewpoint, is a pretty good thing to understand so that, again, we can invest in the programming that's actually going to drive some success. We can look at different demographic profiles as well. This data sits out there. Whether you get into child, baby, and mom product, you get into apparel product, you get into footwear product, obviously then understanding who the user is, who the human is, right? The most important person in the equation, the actual buyer. Who are they and what are they buying? We can look at things around, male versus female. Then we can break down other information, male products or female products or children's products, and what are the price points and who's playing. We can look at, in this example here, we can look at a sampling of jackets being sold online inside the market, and maybe we're working for, a large outerwear retailer, out of the US or Canada or somewhere, and they're priced in that kind of $80 to $200 price range, and they're seeing big macro, again, GDP numbers of hundreds of billions of dollars being sold of outerwear inside the market. But again, what do we have? We have dominance at that $20 to $40 range, and these guys are playing up here. So again, that's their world. So then we can take their world and we can expand that out. So who's winning in their world, right? And we can see all the usual suspects like the North Face for the $80 to $100 range, the North Face for the $1 to $150, the North Face for the $150 to $2, and start to break down what they're doing. We can then even go deeper in some of the data here with some of these guys, and then we can start to look at what are the SKUs that they're selling, right? Could somebody like the North Face be literally selling one SKU and doing 121,000? Is it one size? How many red mediums are being sold in June in 2014? This can be relevant information. How much inventory is going to be required inside the market, which again is cash. It's all cash. How much do you have to put inside the market? And when are we going to start to see some general returns in some of that? So again, useful info helps people fill in the gray matter inside the business plan, right? Often overlooked things, right? Sign with somebody, quick distributor, sends a product inside the market. What product? What SKUs, right? What are we actually putting in the market here and how much? What's the supply? Are we going to do $100,000 in our first 100 days? $1,000 in the first 100 days? That's all cash for the operator. This is all money you've got to just send somewhere and it has to just sit there on a shelf collecting dust, not making returns for you. So breaking down some of these details can be pretty important. This is an interesting case when we're looking with, an organization that, sells a particular type of product. It's a flagship product. Happens to be a rubber boot from the UK, and it's a flagship boot that retails for about $150 US. And the business plan is, at the outset, we're going to go to market, we're going to take our $150 rubber boot, and we're going to build a market based on our flagship product. This is the product, this is the company, this is everything that we do, is literally this one SKU. And you have ancillary product, of course, surrounded that then fill out the product line, but it really is a single boot in here. And trying to help these guys understand, what's the actual market size, right? Well, there's some other products too that sit inside their portfolio, like loafers and the Chelsea and the short boot and things like this. And, typical questions, we have Tmall, we have JD, we can go direct, what's WeChat all about, what's the general commercial viability of all these kinds of things. And again, what we'll typically see is we'll see kind of a broader market size inside Tmall. We'll see, for something like apparel, JD trying to become a bit of a player in here. So the numbers will typically tell the story. Good to know who's competing, right? What's the customer acquisition cost in the bigger marketplace versus the smaller marketplace. Sometimes we find some interesting things. Might make sense to do one or the other, sometimes both in a way. So we can break this down again and then look at price points all the way down to get an idea of I sell here, but the market is up here. But maybe there's enough revenue down here, right? Maybe 2.5 million a year is a legit market. Probably 180 grand a year is not a legit market, right? We can start to overlay other nodes of intel as well, and we get into things like, footwear, rainwear, and things like this. We can look at, if we're going to look at, food products from different types of spaces, we can look at buying behavior out there, and we can look at search queries in different types of areas. So we want to start to layer in the data that start to provide some element of a three-dimensional blueprint. So this is us pulling down yearly precipitation data from inside the market. Where does it rain? And we know from working with the brand that when it rains or when it snows, we see demand surge 3 or 4-fold about 3 or 4 days later, right? So inventory needs to be in place. They need to have the sales mechanisms in place so that wherever it's generally going to rain, they can match inventory and sales infrastructure in these areas. We can look at general sort of just eGDP distribution of where we're finding footwear moving inside the market, and we can take 2 layers like that. And then we can, again, overlay some of that search data to look at what brands are being looked for, or what particular types of products or sizes are being looked for in different areas. So we can layer in, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different layers in there, and then we start to really mitigate the gray matter when we're going to go to market, right, and what the general story is. But then ultimately, the biggest zinger for these guys is, this is the product we sell, that's the price point we look at. You won't see the resolution on here, but a couple of key comparables just before we go live, just before we file the applications with Alibaba, just before we start to put some capital in the market, one final check. What are a couple of our key competitors doing with comparable products that they see as being comparable in other markets? So let's take our product, let's look at our price point, now let's compare to Eigel and Rockfish, the other key competitors that typically mirror some level of performance. Well, unfortunately, nobody's selling virtually anything in that market. One final check, oh yeah, the $150 rubber boot market is about 80, 90 grand a year. So flagship product, the entire company, the entire business plan, this is what they do, this is what they sell, this one thing, there's no market inside the market for it. But what there is, there's big markets for things like the Chelsea, there's big markets for the loafer, the backpack, the kids' products, and things like this. So what would they have done? They would have gone to market, maybe put $1 million, $2 million worth of inventory inside the market, none of which would have ever sold. And now they've got to unwind the position and get it out, and they put all the capital in, all the materials, the content, the bodies, the training, everything that goes along with trying to make that successful. In the end, there was really no market for it. So again, useful intel, right, to mitigate that general sort of loss. So as we look at it, it's basic things, right? Where's the market? What are the channels? How do we position? And what are the general conversion mechanisms that can be used inside of it? So when we typically are trying to help and support, and the work we've been doing with Trade Commissioner and the feds and things like this, is just to provide more intel, more data, and not do the kind of macro intel that just really isn't usable, right? We can talk about 800 million users online, but really when you go back to your office, what are you going to do with that information, right? What we want to talk about is, anybody will say, well, I want to go to the market, this is what we do, and you're obsessed with what you do, and that's what your life is all day, every day. And what we want to be able to do is help kind of collapse the delta between what you do and what the market really is buying, and hopefully there's some overlap in there. There's enough overlap in there to give you some optimism or at least some insight that says, okay, we can maybe make a move in here. Maybe it equips you better to then just deal with a distributor who wants to negotiate really great terms for them, and you feel like this is your only option inside the market. Well, does a couple of little data points put the leverage maybe back in your hand in that negotiation? Maybe, right? Does it allow you to say, look, maybe the market's a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit more complex. It's more than just signing and sending product. Maybe you need to retain some things like online real estate for yourself. Maybe you want to own your web properties. Maybe you want to own your communication strategy and thus have that as a key node in the negotiation in the margin deal you provide with them. Instead of 50% margin share, maybe they're taking 40, maybe they're taking 30, maybe they're taking 25 because you're going to maintain control of your own market. And not only that, 4 or 5 years later, when you maybe want to unwind your position with that partner, you've invested in some basic web infrastructure that you also own the customer. And they've been coming to your web property, communicating on your social channel with you, not them, so that again, you have control of your own market in the long play. So these are the things that we think are important. These are the things we think that are possible. We talk about things like digital revolution, great partners like Alibaba. This has totally shrunk the size of the distance between the two markets. And again, if we just know a little bit of intel and a little bit of knowledge around some of the tools, really doesn't make it that challenging for an organization in Halifax to go direct to the end buyer inside the market and control as much of that margin as possible. And we've basically been trying to support and enable some of that over the years. So, time? We're good? Okay. So what we'll do, does anybody have any questions, or do we want to go back to any of the data slides? Yes, sir.
Regarding the warehouses that the UPIC holds, I noticed that you were having an expansion from 50 to 50,000. Are these bonded warehouses?
Domestic warehouses.
They're domestic. Are they only based in Shanghai?
Nanjing. I'll cover about 3 or 4 different types of industries in here, some of which will be not relevant to anybody, but again, the mechanics are all the same in here. And I think a lot of these mechanics are manageable from your office in this part of the country. Micron, large multi-billion-dollar company, selling consumer-based electronic products. The nodes of what they launch inside the market, very simply, website, paid search on Baidu, organic search on Baidu, anybody who's running SEO and PPC in the West, pretty simple SEO PPC programming in China. Little CRM inside the market, just so they can collect some data, right? People filling in a form, I want to buy, I want to inquire, I want to buy a pallet, I want to buy a container, I want to buy volume, maybe 100 individual units, all that information, right? Building up repositories of who's actually communicating with the brand, running omni-channel media campaigns, in-country hosting for the website itself, content marketing, and ultimately the conversion point, the Tmall store inside the market. Wrapping the whole thing up in Chinalytics, so we get total attribution data of if a user comes from a content page, if they come from a WeChat channel, if they click on an ad somewhere out there in the market. We want to know where that user comes from. Were they using Internet Explorer 6, Internet Explorer 8? What time of day was it? Who were they? Are they coming back and purchasing again and again and again? Is this maybe an IT manager on a phone going from computer to computer inside an office making the purchase? Is this somebody who's in a restaurant who reads product off a menu and then realizes that Nova Scotian lobster tasted pretty good? I'm now looking online to find where I can see that, right? And maybe then finding out where were they in the country, or where are you seeing surges of demand come in? And is it potentially a partner or distributor or retailer who's doing a really good job in an area that maybe then you want to engage with a little bit deeper because they're your moneymaker inside the market? So basic mechanics. Nothing in here is complicated, really, on an individual level. Localized website, all in simplified Chinese, right? So the goal of the website is to communicate with the search engines of Baidu. The goal of the website is to have control of the message. The goal of the website is to get attribution data so you can find out where in the market that person came from to come to your web platform. We're using websites in the West, we're using websites in China. This is not a new concept, but we want to host that website inside China. We want to register an ICP license, again, which is basically the license plate from the ministry that oversees the web inside China. Simple thing to do. We want to make sure that as we're in simplified Chinese, it's 100% simplified Chinese, and we're not doing a dual language website. No Canadian flags, linking it back to English, nothing like that. We're totally localized. But again, we've maintained the general essence of the brand. We're working with the search engine, which is Baidu. Baidu is not a great search engine, okay? Really, the last update for Baidu's search algorithm was around the same time that Google upgraded its security protocols, okay? So that's really what we're working with. Anybody in the room who's ever done SEO or done Google strategies, think Google 2006, 2007, okay? That's generally what the algorithm methodology is for running SEO inside the market. All the information about the product, all the information about the SKUs, how to buy, where to buy, and then we take a nice little API connection to Tmall so that the user, once we've convinced them that this is what we want to buy, then we're going to send them to our checkout page inside the platform, where now they can make the actual purchase. What we don't want them to do is we don't want them to go to the home page of an e-commerce platform or a marketplace and search for something like DRAM, right? Or Nova Scotia lobster. And then what happens? We get what, 5 results, 10 results, 50 results? Maybe a competitor's paid an extra $1 for the ad, and now you've lost that user to somebody else. So we're gonna go for the cheap traffic, the high ROI traffic inside Baidu, bring them to our site, control the message, control the presentation, maybe get some of their customer data, get full attribution metrics, and when we've convinced them to purchase on our terms, we're gonna send them to our checkout page, where there's no competitors, no Kingston, no SanDisk, no Samsung up there. It's just Micron and the buyer, and that's all it is. So we get great conversion here. We get very little spillage in this type of methodology in there, right? We're still going to use Alibaba. We're going to use Tmall for the checkout page because the buyers in the market have said they want to have an escrow payment service. They want that money to go from their wallet to an escrow third party to sit there for 7 days. Well, they have 7 days just to confirm that they wanted to make the purchase because they can press cancel. And the money comes back and the product goes back to you, right? And that's the conditions of what it is. But that mitigates the risk from the buying standpoint. So yes, we have high return rates, much higher than we have in the West, but because the platforms enable and encourage trial, low risk, no risk purchasing, this actually elevates overall purchases and revenue plays inside the market, right? So we still want to partner with the platforms because those are the conditions. They're basically ensuring the purchase for you, right? Again, for foreign companies that are coming in new to the market, this can be a great way to start to build early revenue plays inside the market. And then it comes in the complexity around things like the marketing. And then this is where it generally starts to get fairly complicated. When we have all of the different types of promotions products that sit inside the market, lots of different discount opportunities, heavy-duty promotions every single day. There's 30 different promotions going on. We know about things like 618, we know about 1111, we know about 1212, these equivalents of Cyber Monday on steroids inside the market. But then what about on just a random Monday? When you're working with the platforms and they're saying, hey, we're gonna run a coupon play, we're gonna run a promotion, we're doing this, we're doing that. And like, how do you figure out what's relevant? How do you figure out what you should really actually be activating inside the market? So really having the preparation to deal with omni-channel plays, omni-channel discounts, promotions, things like this. What does the market really want? And it can be really easy to get caught up in big discounting games, big hyper-promotion games and things like this, things that you may feel erode the essence and the positioning of what your brand actually is inside the market. So some of this stuff is relevant, a lot of the stuff isn't. What to pick, when to pick it, important to figure out. So the complexities of participating in the daily game is, again, something for organizations that they should probably know about. Not a wise thing to skip on, right? A lot of money can be made inside these areas playing in these marketplaces. More local of a player in the apparel space, exact same program, exact same methodology here, right? Big hyper competition inside of apparel, big players spending lots of capital. And again, you can be a small player going into the market and up against some big players with some pretty big media budgets out there who are buying market share at a pace that you just can't compete with. Well, we can take organizations and yeah, it might be a big brand, it might be a prominent brand, doesn't mean they're spending money, doesn't mean they throw money away, right? Some companies go for things like aspirational content and don't want to spend money on ads. They want to instead hold integrity, and they're not big advertising companies. They don't want to discount. They don't want to erode their price points to just build market share. They don't want to take a loss. Their owners won't let them take a loss. Their private equity partners won't let them take a loss. The bank won't let them take a loss, right? So again, let's go back to Baidu, right? Let's go to Baidu. Let's throw up a .cn website. Let's control the experience. Let's take the catalog. Let's push it into the market. Let's do it locally. Let's do it right. Let's use the API connections. Let's connect into the platforms of Tmall, and let's do the big delivery. Let's run things like content. A hugely overlooked tactic for building market share inside the market is content. Very few brands are investing in content. Ads can buy quick market share. Ads can breathe life into a program, and they can quickly get some inertia going and run some sugar highs in like the first 100 days to just get some revenue moving. But then the long game, investing in maybe 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 pieces of content in the first year, this can be done with going to the local college and finding a student from China to come into your office and work an internship and take your huge repository of content that you've been building over the years in the West, every press release, every article you've written, every blog you've posted, every engagement you've ever invested your hard-earned time and cash to build in the West, bring somebody in, localize it, and litter it all over the market in all of the right areas. That sits there forever. And all of a sudden your search rankings go up, and then you have users and buyers, maybe, again, if they're in agra and they want to look for things like country of origin, ingredients, methodology of raising the product, right? The processing plants, all of these things that you've done. You've maybe acquired certain USDA approvals or Canadian approvals or medical approvals or various tiers of acceptability in your own area. All of this stuff is so valuable to take into the market. Investing in things like Facebook, trying to navigate that, push content out there inside the market. Again, this is all just a huge repository of currency that can be used inside the market to start to load up, right? Own your Baidu properties that are things like your Yahoo Answers, your Wikipedias, your forums, your portals, your blogs. We see BBSs in China, which none of us have ever used in well over a decade. We see municipal BBSs for special content, special subject matter in municipalities like Chongqing, 30, 35 million people, give or take, something like that, where there's maybe like 18 million active users on these, and they're looking at things like exercise or nutrition or products for my baby or, for a pregnant mother, what should you or should you not do around nutrition and product and how you should set your house up, how to build a baby room. High active users every day, all day, looking for content, exchanging information. There is like no competition in these areas. These are great areas for you to go in if you don't have big media budgets, but a little bit of effort, write the content, find the forum, find the portal, find the BBS, and throw this content up inside there in the market. Sometimes even throw the editor 50 US or a sample product and have that article as the top article. They might forget to take that article down. That might sit up there as the top article for a year. And we see this kind of thing happen all the time. We used to buy ads on some of these platforms where guys didn't even know they could sell ads. We were buying ads for the BC government 8 or 9 years ago, having to show receipts to the BC government. These guys were writing it down on a piece of paper, taking a photo of it, and we had to submit that to the BC Ministry of Finance, right, for a $30 ad. But again, we had 18 million users on this particular platform. We must have driven like 25,000 users to their website, right? So these are real numbers. This is where the rubber hits the road. And this is generally our position, right, with understanding this can drive some pretty big numbers. So with these guys, and obviously a lot of growth came from these types of tactics. This is a case study around tech and technology. 2 slides. Okay, this is obviously complicated and it's a bit of a schematic and architecture for something that we did, but the point here is that maybe some people in the room have considerations and complexities around things like inventory management, supply chain, and just dealing with the localization requirements that we have around that. So the norm in the market when we're dealing with the platforms is that they're going to want to have platform-specific inventory, right? The same way you might go to a particular country or a distributor, or you might work with somebody like Amazon, and you need to have a specific inventory that's allocated to them, right? That could be 100 units, 1,000 units, 25,000 units, and it's not really that different inside the platforms inside the market. And they want some assurances that when you're going to do business on their platform, you're going to have the product to fulfill the order. At the end of the day, it's their customer, and they're going to want to make sure that when somebody buys, the inventory is actually available. Well, for Trek bicycles, it's a little bit complex when you have things like $25,000 road bikes, right? And how do you now start to have Tmall-specific inventory, or Jingdong-specific inventory, or then dealer-specific inventory, and then bike shop-specific inventory? The inventory costs start to get pretty heavy-duty, right? Not only that, kids' bikes, parts, and accessories, where you have things like potentially a default product, and you need to now gather up all that inventory for product defects and manage where all of this product is inside the market. So these guys might use some very sophisticated enterprise resource planning software like SAP Hybris, right? Multi-$100,000 minimum build-outs, big sophisticated things. They're running all of their global supply chain on this. They can fulfill a product that somebody buys on Trek.com, and then somebody can walk into the bike store in their neighborhood and pick up that $20,000 road bike or that $100 kids bike, get a little bit of a demo, go back there to then leverage the warranty that they've secured with that. And so they can't really afford to have single-channel inventory, and a lot of companies have this general kind of issue. So this is just a piece of technology used to mitigate that we build. So yes, we opened the Tmall store because that's really what the market wants. The market wants to buy the products on Tmall. But sometimes the user's going to buy the product, they're going to buy the $20,000 road bike on Tmall after 2 weeks of online chat, but they don't want that bike delivered to them. They want to go into a specialty bike store and just get at least a product demo, right? So how you collapse that world that comes together, right? Because that's not really how the mechanics of the market work. The mechanics of the market should work so that if the product is bought on Tmall, it's a Tmall piece of inventory that comes off the shelf of a warehouse and gets delivered to the end user somehow, right? Well, we used a big piece of technology to basically merge these things together so that somebody can go to the platform, make the purchase, and then walk into the dealer's store and actually receive the product and get the product demo and actually use the warranty back in there. And so somebody buys a Trek bicycle out of a dealer store, one piece of inventory comes out of the Tmall store, and vice versa, somebody buys online, and that piece of inventory then comes out of the store. So Trek's super complex, multi-million-dollar inventory requirement for the market has now been basically boiled down to a single set of inventory that can supply the entire market, greatly minimizing the overall capital requirements for in the market. And on the front end, same mechanics. So from the user standpoint, it's all the same, right? Simpler for Trek, cheaper for Trek, mitigates all the risk really that come with over-inventory in the market, and then on the front end for the user, done exactly the way the user wants to do it. They want to go to Tmall, they want to buy the product, and they can experience it just the way that they want. Anybody who works in the B2B space might not see a lot of relevancy with like Tmall implementation and clicking the button buy now, okay? But this is where the mechanics have major parallels between the different types of works that take place. So Danaher's obviously a $100+ billion company, multidisciplinary, and they own the life sciences and diagnostic spaces and things like this. And these particular companies, we ran some programs with about 5 or 6 years ago and continue to see growth with them in this area. Companies like Applied Biometric SciEx, they're selling mass spectrometers, right? They can run blood drops and run analysis and diagnose and figure out if there's cancer cells growing. Leica Biosystems is ancillary products for high-end microscopes, inside labs, retail products for about $25,000 a pop. Beckman Coulter's about the same mass spectrometers with SciEx, and Radiometer does things like blood gas analyzers. So as we've seen hospital build-outs inside the country, we've seen huge R&D labs and huge R&D parks get developed. Obviously, then there is a whole world of product specialists who then come in and fit out all of these units, right? And companies like Danaher's subsidiaries, they want obviously in on the action. Now, what we have seen and what we always know about generally inside China is the nicest car in any parking lot tends to be the purchasing manager's car, right? And the legacy relationship between the purchasing manager and the seller is a legacy relationship that's been there forever, and it's dealer and buyer, and good luck breaking that bond. And there's obviously some relationship there that you know nothing about, but you do know what's going on there. And it's a hard thing to break, right? What we've seen over the years is we've seen a maturing of the procurement systems inside the market. And as more companies inside China, whether it's a healthcare company or a dentistry company or any type of B2B macro company, starting to list on the New York exchanges. Andre Philippe talked about, the largest companies, now being out of China. But then we can go a little bit further down, right? Like the billion-dollar companies and things like this. The companies that buy these products, right, or buy advanced manufacturing equipment as we're trying to automate and advance manufacturing lines, and we're looking to the West for good advanced manufacturing products and things like this. We're seeing a maturing of the procurement system. And what used to be one buyer, one seller, and that relationship is as strong as oak. Now we're seeing that second quote and that third quote start to become a requirement in the purchasing mechanisms that take place, right? And as these companies want to then seek funding globally, they need to start playing the global game. And companies like Danaher, this is, again, very, very simple tactics that we've been able to roll out here. So the tender gets raised 18 months before the purchase is actually going to get made for something like a $500,000 mass spectrometer. And we have the relationship with the buyer and the seller that's basically going to take place. Well, now we're 30 days out where the purchase actually needs to get made, and they're not allowed to make that purchase without quote number 2 and quote number 3. They know no other suppliers. They've never had to know another supplier. What is the purchasing manager doing? They're going on Baidu, and they're looking for blood gas analyzer. They're looking for mass spectrometer. They're looking for cancer detection equipment. What are we doing? Throwing up .cn websites, hosting them in China, optimizing the living daylights out of these things, and running SEO and PPC, like the two biggest old school tactics that sit out there inside the market. And what's the procurement manager doing? They're finding Beckman Coulter, they're finding AB SciEx, we've run the content, we own the front 5 pages of Baidu. Their only second and third quote option is a Danaher subsidiary. And what's happening is they're now getting the leads coming into their sites 30 days before purchase. What used to be a 1 to 2 to 3 year sales cycle for one of these products has now been reduced down to about 30 days. And they're getting in the action where they've got the buyer with authority, with intent to buy at a timeline that's going to close like any minute. So for organizations like this that invest in 4 or 5 year sales cycle processes and have to put that infrastructure into a market, this is nothing but profitable for them. And the results really are very fast in what we typically see. Huge lead growth, major increases in traffic, all of which coming to their site. And again, owning message, owning result, shrinking the sales cycle. And then when we look at things more scientifically and break down the advanced analytics in terms of like cost per lead, cost per sale, right? If a $25 ad can bring a user to a site to fill in a form that then have a sales manager go to the hospital and demo the equipment, and that can result in a $500,000 sale, that is some pretty sweet ROI, right? What are they doing? Cite and search. Again, like the two most basic tactics out there. What were all their competitors doing? .com/CN, no paid search, no SEO. Thinking they're doing China, these guys were doing China. And they basically ate up the entire life sciences and diagnostics growth revolution that happened 4 or 5 years ago inside the market. Tmall Global, Tmall Flagship, we have cross-border options, we have domestic options. Typically you're bound by regulatory, right? Some are easier, some you can do from the West, some you can do inside market. If we're gonna do Tmall Flagship, then we're gonna take inventory, we're gonna put it inside the market, we're gonna fulfill inventory from inside the market, and we're gonna have more of a domestic operation. We're gonna accept returns inside the market. We're gonna need a local license that can allow to be a merchant of record to sell in Chinese RMB, issue VAT FAPIAOs, the receipts that are used locally, all these sort of little things that take place in order to sell domestic. And then some companies based on things like compliance, whether we get, with a diamond company or jewelry company where maybe loose stones can't be sold inside the market. So for loose stones, they need to sell cross-border. And so we can basically create double programs, present the brand, build the brand, and run a flagship program and run a domestic program. A cosmetics company will talk to us and they say, look, we've got some product that's animal tested and some product that isn't, and then is organic and has all the general specialty of what it is that they do. Are they gonna take their entire line and go cross-border, or are they gonna do a little bit of cross-border for the products that regulatory-wise have to go cross-border, and then can they roll out some domestic products as well? Maybe the domestic play is the revenue driver to then build up the harder play, which is the cross-border play. If you're gonna sell cross-border, because it's an easier way to go, it's cheaper, it's faster, the product better be pretty darn special to allow for the customer to wait a week to 2 weeks, right? So we have some apparel companies that we've seen go onside the platforms that are gonna fulfill from Washington or fulfill from Toronto. They're gonna take 2 weeks to get that product inside the market. Again, that product better be pretty special to wanna have a user wait past the 7-day money-back option. So we gotta think about the mechanics of the user. They make the purchase, day 5, day 6, product hasn't crossed customs, they're getting a little nervous. Do they want to cancel that order before that product comes all the way in, right? So we can mitigate these things. We can communicate to the market. We can tell them if the product's going to be late, then maybe we can double down with some kind of a gift, right, to manage that sort of element in there. So there's all sorts of different things that you could do that you would do in the West with managing that. And then finally, a general kind of non-e-commerce program. This is just with the United States Meat Export Federation. This is an interesting program where they ran this sort of government-to-government, G to G, this government-to-business, G to B, and this government-to-consumer, G to C. And really what they were trying to do was, can we use content, can we use social, can we start to influence the market to talk about, USD-graded beef out of the US, USD-graded pork and lamb out of the US, and can we start to influence policymakers inside China on just the depth and caliber and quality of US cattle and US pork, et cetera. And that was the government-to-government play. So taking white papers and getting those white papers localized and put inside the market. If we can get enough of that and get enough of that churned up inside the market, can we kind of change the mindset generally of how people are perceiving US quality production? Can we also run a general government-to-business program where we can start to build some demand with the importers and distributors and the dealers to basically participate in potentially importing or then going up and lobbying the government guys to get the US beef approved? And then on the B2C standpoint, or the G to C standpoint, is can we engage, can the US MEF engage the market inside China to get them asking in restaurants and more excited for US beef and US lamb and pork? And so this was a pretty simple, fun program. Eating competitions, right? And can we send users via social to go around to restaurants to start asking for US product? And can the US MEF sponsor maybe like a trip or maybe product, or can they send them ribs, or whatever it might be, in a way to get people talking more about it? And so this was just a fun little program that wasn't a lot of e-commerce, but this was using digital, using the tools, leveraging the conditions to take the message, in essence, to the people to start to build up some general demand. And we had some really great tools that we were able to use, like WeChat, to be able to participate in some of that. And so these guys saw some pretty heavy-duty success, built humongous communities, and this gives them an opportunity, now that they own a little bit of the market every year, to be able to run retargeting campaigns and re-engage these markets and basically say, look, go to your restaurant, ask if they have US beef, take a photo of you asking, record what their answer was, and post it. And let's run a gaming activation program here, right? So can they get the people to do the lobbying for the US MEF in a pretty fun way? So that's it. We can have some dialogue. I don't know, David, if we're going to do any Q&A if anybody wants me to go into any more depth. But as a part of like what we do with the trade commissioner and, trying to be better stewards of, the business community in Canada and get involved with some of these trade missions that they're doing. We've always offered, quick analysis, flash analysis, things like this, right? Do I have a market? Is there anything in there that can at least warrant some real investigation? So, you can take my contact information. Peter McMath is here with me as well, who's building Footprint in Atlantic Canada for us, who's a local resource we have here. And I hope I'll be coming back again maybe next year in whatever it is that we do. So if no questions, we can talk during the break.
Sure, I don't think we're going to interview. I don't need them. Sure. Oh, yes. Okay, thank you. Joseph, a creative question for you. What about cultural products like live streaming or kids shows, animation, TV? I may want to access the on a live streaming basis or paid consumption basis. Does WPIC has any ideas in regards to cultural products?
Yeah, content is always, cultural content is sketchy with a generally controlled content market, obviously. I talk about content in the realm of, your product communicating factual of what you're doing. Translating essence of culture, it's got to be a fairly clean, in essence, pre-approved message, basically. Yep. Publishing a book inside the market, a video, a movie, right? I mean, these are things that undergo very deep levels of, approvals inside the market. When we talk about web content for products, it's typically under, Ministry of Information Authority, pretty clean general rules. We know we can't talk about gambling. We know we can't talk about certain things. There's clear topics that never get talked about. When somebody who's running online gambling comes to us and they want to do something in the market, no way. Right? Anything,
think like children's book, children's stories, something like that for consumption.
Well, this is where the complexity comes in because it undergoes equal scrutiny, basically, right? Then we get into things like video streaming and stuff like that. Some people want to do things around, advanced education streaming. Can we stream advanced education, stream English content to the market? That's cleaner, that's doable, but video streaming is extraordinarily expensive on bandwidth, right? So lots of servers, big clusters of servers, you're dealing with transmitting video through the firewall. If anyone's tried to have WebEx conference calls with partners in China, right, it's just always a big drama. It takes 20 minutes to get the connection healthy. You're Skyping with somebody out there, right? I mean, this is the reality of it, right? So using cross-border technologies, it's doable. Yeah. It's just a heavy cost, right?
Last angle on this, Yoku monetization. Tudo monetization. Is there a possibility for this for content creators, or is this off the book as a viable investment?
Yeah, I mean, as long as the content's in line with what you're allowed to do, then video is still a great thing. Video works really well with search, so posting video that's optimized properly can produce big-time dividends in the long play. Again, any videos that have been produced in the West, and you have them up on YouTube channels now, and if it's an agri player looking at the landscape of where they participate in what they do, or if you have a production facility that you're holding on to producing inside Canada because that's of value to you, and you have videography of that, then we can take those source files, we can open up Yoku channels, which is China's equivalent of YouTube, and we can start to put those videos up inside the market and optimize and have them linked accordingly and things like this. That platform tends to be totally littered with ads. Actually, today's YouTube is like yesterday's Yoku, with just the insanity of media now that's going on inside those ecosystems. But I think it's only a couple $100 for an advanced account where now you don't need to deliver ads on your platform. So I think Yoku's viable, and we have new video platforms coming up that are pretty relevant.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any more questions? So I have one question. What is the biggest, probably the major thing that you see as a stumbling block that people make their first time in when they're starting to consider this? Probably too long of a list.
Well, I don't know. I mean, every organization is different. Every organization lives in their own reality, right? Everybody lives in their own reality. They have their own set of challenges. They have their own unit economic model that makes sense to them. And, it's hard to deviate out of that, right? It's really hard to deviate out of what you do and what you understand. And I don't think it needs to be a leap of faith. Yeah. I don't think that it needs to be like that. The information sits out there. We can have clarity. We have partners. We have platforms. There are resources out there. There's old school rumors about it's who you know and this Guanxi thing and going on a trade mission or meeting the right person. Yeah, there's relevancy in that for sure. And what we're seeing is from a legacy standpoint, that's how businesses were going into the market, is finding kind of that really hardcore kind of magic local partner that ordered that first container, and maybe that second container was never ordered. But with that first container maybe came some kind of a deal that bound the Canadian exporter, the US exporter, to that condition, right? And unwinding that position becomes very complicated, right? Before this whole e-commerce revolution took place, you had an exclusive distributor and you signed over the market and that was it. And then all of a sudden you had online real estate come up, and who owned online real estate? Did the distributor own it? Could you own it? Did anybody really know? Could you even really communicate effectively with them to figure out what this reality was? I don't know if these are mistakes. These are complexities that I think are producing challenges a year later, 2 years, 3 years later, 4 years later, right? Or the distributor then picks up a new partner, a new supplier of a product that's a competitor of yours, and now what's up with that, right? But how do you unwind that position? They've built a market. Maybe you're doing 100,000 or 500,000 or $1 million a year through that distributor, but you just don't like these other partners they're working with. Or maybe now they've just sort of deprioritized your brand. They used your brand to get new players in their portfolio, right? But they've kind of locked you into this deal. And what are you supposed to do about that, right? How do you get out of that? Do you unwind your position, drop your $1 million in revenue, and rebuild from scratch? So for those that are looking at the market fresh, maybe retaining a little bit of ownership can make a lot of sense, right? Maybe putting some mechanisms in to drive online traffic and then send the traffic to the distributor so they can still own the sale, handle the legal and the taxation and the import, but maybe you can find a way to sneakily own the customer in a way, but have a fair deal whereby you're paying for the market build and they get to own the actual point of sale. So maybe rushing in to agreements like that, feeling you need to sign over too much. These are things that we're seeing organizations now saying, I wish I only knew, or we wish we would have done it a little bit differently, right? So I think there's another way. Sure, yeah.
Me again. Could you talk a bit about WPIC's support in terms of trademark registration and the importance for producers to start head-on with protecting their trademarks?
Okay, trademark registration, yes. Big deal, obviously. So China's got this at first to register, right, David? The rule? First to reg, right, is what it's called?
First to file.
First to file. So again, classic distributor move, right? Hook up with a distributor, and then they register the trademark because convenience or whatever that might be. But there are protocols if you register in other markets where it gives you air cover inside China, so that's not really a requirement to do. So what do we see today? We see organizations that want to go direct. They want to set up flagship operations on Tmall because that makes a lot of sense. Maybe they don't own their trademark. Maybe they don't own their Chinese trademark, right? And they found out that somebody else owns it. We like the trademark laws inside China. We think they're really, really good and they're really progressive and they're a lot better than other markets. So we have first to file, which can cause this squatting issue. But typically with first to file, in that filing, the registrar actually needs to fill in some information that basically says this trademark is not in use globally, right? And this is typically where we see the big blind spot with the squatters inside the market. So hire a lawyer, execute litigation, do all this non-use stuff, hundreds of hours, lots of billables going on, right? Maybe ends, maybe doesn't. They're going to counter-sue, and this is just going to go on and on and on and on. And in the process, you're not doing business inside the market, or maybe you're at risk of some kind of negative consequence in that. So what we're finding and what we're doing is we built a piece of technology to tap in to the trademark registrar's repository of all the filings that have ever taken place. So we can literally just type in CCBC and find out if anybody in China ever registered CCBC and what that application actually looked like. And we can typically find that they actually ticked the box that said, this mark is not in use globally. And that's typically where the violation is on the squatting issue. And once the person who registered, the violator, the squatter, recognizes that you know that, we find most of the times they're prepared to cut a really quick deal to be able to get out of that position, which then puts some power back in the customer standpoint. And then not only just around things like recovery of trademark. Maybe you own your trademark, and it's a clean system, and you've done all the right things, and you've spent a very little amount of money historically to be able to control your trademarks inside the market. What does that mean? That doesn't mean that nobody's not going to infringe on that trademark, right? So, somebody can take a Lulu Joe product and slap it up and put Lulu Joe on anything they want to put it on and be playing in the market, right? And unless Dawn has visibility in terms of who's doing that, she could go find hundreds of thousands of dollars of people selling muslin cloth, or allegedly, right? And selling this product inside the market, claiming that it's Lulu Joe, right? Or behaving as if, and they're saying we're CCBC and come to our event, right? Well, we have technologies, we can use the data. We might want to normally look at things like GMV data and receipt data. What if we change that mechanism a little bit and we want to find out who's using the word Lulu Joe in anything that they're doing inside the market? And all of a sudden now we can find 35, 40, or take something like Canada Goose on a big scale and find that there's like 2,500 people selling Canada Goose. And Canada Goose knows of like 3, right? So who are all of these other people and what are they doing? Some are gray market. You hear about things like Daigou, people smuggling product in, not paying duty, selling it for like 1% markup. Well, you're competing against that. You're bringing product in, you're paying 20% duty, and now you've got some guy going to Harry Rosen, buying a Canada Goose jacket, bringing it in, and selling it for retail plus $1, right? And now you're competing against yourself. And then you just get major channel conflict and just a messy market. Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows what the price points are. But the rules are such, and organizations like Alibaba are really cooperative with this. So we can take all the data and say, look, this is everybody who's selling Lulu Joe. None of these guys have permission. We're not going to go do cease and desist and big billable hours. We're just going to say, can those 2,500 people please show us that they have the authorization from Dawn to sell Lulu Joe? And when nobody can come back and prove that, they're really good partners to say, all 2,500 of you, you're gone. And if you come back, maybe we'll clear your merchant account. And then if you want to come back again, it's going to be 90 days minimum to re-register. Well, when we can detect in a day and work with them on day 2 and get them taken down on day 3, whack-a-mole is no longer an issue inside the market. So the ability to control is great, or having distributors who are deviating from your price point. You want to sell for $100, you're selling for $100, you have dealers and retailers and resellers and other merch players who are selling for $80, the platform will work with you, and you own the trademarks. You get final cut on what anybody does with your product. So we can then go to those people and say, you sell it for $100 or you don't sell it at all. And they'll work with you to basically enforce this. So the control can go back in from both a fraudulent standpoint and then from a price control standpoint to just have a really, really clean execution inside the market.
That's a good question. Just to comment on that, we get, it's not uncommon at the consulate that we get companies coming to us with issues of trademark infringement, squatting on brand names. I would say, you can do a test for yourself. If certainly if you're at a stage where you're going to China on an exploratory mission and you haven't trademarked your brand, I would recommend doing so because somebody will do it for you.
I just have a question regarding that. What kind of challenges that you experience for helping the Canadian business to go actually and to enter the e-commerce marketplace in China? And also based on your introduction, we understand that the search engine plays an important role in China e-commerce marketplaces. And whether we have any a success story that the companies actually go into, for say, utilizing the platform of Alibaba and the JD.com and actually can use their advantages and techniques to help them to promote their business.
Okay, I think there's 3 points in there, basically.
Actually 2. We was Cows China.
Okay. So I think, in terms of the general challenges, right, I mean, it's time and it's commitment, right? Like, these are all little micro modules to build programs up, get them elevated and push them out, but they take time, right? I think, we can just start from the beginning, right? Like, opening a store is about 100 days on a good day, okay? That's like roughly the timeline. We've done it in like 60 when it's very rushed, 100 is typically average, and then some organizations just, they take 6 months to get up and running, right? Then when you're up and running, you've got to build your market, inside the platform, right? It's not like you go live and then, in comes the revenue, right? It takes time to build. You got to buy literally every single user, and then that gets complicated from the economics, right? So if you go on the 6-month timeline, you're 6 months to open, right? You're 6 months into it, right? And now you need to start buying every single user. So you might get to like month 7, month 8, month 9, still not realizing, real returns that you were really hoping for, right? So the commitment game, I think, is a real game, and I think that's really, to deal with then like the success story side of things, that's where you want to have relationships like direct with Alibaba, have partners inside the market, people who understand it, have resources internally that you're earmarking to become specialists in these platforms so they can participate, right? All the mechanics of what we showed with like the daily promotional stuff, these are all the things that make it break, right? Like having people who are going to do online chat, easy things to cut costs on, right? Like the easiest things to cut in any budget is like marketing, the online chat guy, whatever that might be, right? But looking at the market with the mechanics of how things work, that's where the rubber hits the road, right? So I think just committing to those things and holding firm, you know, if you know in the beginning that you have a market because you've taken time to get the data and you know that my $110 product, there is buyers, there are a lot of buyers in those areas, then really committing to that and seeing that through. Okay, great. Thank you.
Questions? Great information. So we have a quick nutrition break right now. We're going to be back here in this room at 11:20. It's 11:06 right now. So 11:20, we'll be back here to start the next section.